Rafael Mangual joins us. And Rafael, thanks for joining us. He's been on the show many times before. And he is the, what is it? Let me get this right. Fellow and Deputy Director of Legal Policy at the Manhattan Institute. That's right.
You got it right.
So let's also, I went nuts yesterday on bail reform.
Okay.
And I highlighted this story here in New York where, this guy got arrested for robbing like four banks, right? And then they let him out. And then he was like quoted as saying, I can't believe they let me out.
That's right, yeah.
What were they thinking, right?
Well, the problem is that they weren't thinking because the law no longer requires them to think in so many cases, right? This is the major problem with the way that New York State went about bail reform. Right? If you have a conversation about bail reform in New York, you're almost certainly going to get two arguments thrown at you. The first argument is going to be something along the lines of, well, it's not fair to have a system where you can have someone who is poor and not so dangerous get held in jail because they can't afford bail, where in that same system you'll have a really dangerous person who's rich and wealthy and can afford bail, they get out. And I understand that fundamental fairness question really does matter, and it resonates with a lot of people, and that's why it functions as the impetus for bail reform in the United States and in New York in particular.
But New York, to me, I want to bring in, Frankie on this because he loves this stuff. But New York seems to have completely eliminated. It's crossing the nation, right? Bail reform is crossing the nation. Every state is adopting it a little differently. New Jersey did it okay, I think.
That's exactly right.
The judges still have discretion. In New York, it's just a binary,
exactly.
Right?
Well, the
judge can't think anything.
That's the second point that people always make in the conversation about bail reform in New York is that, well, if you look at what New Jersey did it, well, and the sky didn't fall, therefore New York's going to be just fine. But there are some key differences between how New Jersey handled bail reform and how New York handled bail reform. And those differences really do matter quite a bit. For example, in New Jersey, judges retain the ability to remand dangerous defendants to pretrial confinement on the basis of public safety risk. New York judges can't do that. They have no discretion.
Right.
They have no discretion.
So is this, Frankie, are we in a lawless society now?
Let's ask Rafael Mangual. You tell me.
Well, I wouldn't say we're necessarily in a lawless society just yet. As I've mentioned many times on the show, New York does benefit from a long history, about 25 straight years of crime declines, and that is going to insulate us to a significant degree, at least in the short run, from really large crime spikes. But over time, the criminal class in this city is going to learn that the transaction costs of criminal activity have gone down, especially in that immediate post-arrest period. And we know that nationally, a lot of crime is committed by people who have active criminal justice statuses, people who are on probation, who are on parole, who are on bail. Nationally, about 12% of violent felons commit their offenses while they're awaiting trial. That's not a small number, but when you consider the fact that other jurisdictions in the country do allow judges to remand dangerous defendants, my guess is that number is going to be significantly higher in New York.
So, Rafael, putting aside the bail reform issue, and I think you make a very persuasive case for your column in the New York Post, and we're going to link to it on the Liquid Lunch Twitter at Liquid Lunch TV. We saw last weekend in Baltimore a shooting gallery of violence. Why are cities like Baltimore and Chicago in such bad shape when it comes to violent crime? What are those cities doing incorrectly that cities like New York are doing a little bit better?
Yeah, I mean, I think two of the main things that they're doing incorrectly are on the incarceration front and on the policing front. On the incarceration front, both Chicago and Baltimore have decarcerated at a very rapid pace. They've driven down their prison populations to a pretty significant degree in a very short amount of time, right? A lot of people will point to New York and they'll say, well, look, over the last 20 years, New York has decarcerated close to 30% and the sky hasn't fallen.
Is that a word now? Decarcerated?
That has entered the lexicon of criminal justice advocacy.
Is that just in the Urban Dictionary, or is that like an actual
No, it's a real
word?
Academic term.
Really?
Only us nerds use it.
I never heard of it before. I like it. I get it.
It's pretty intuitive.
We are facing the decarceration of America.
That's right. That's right.
What we're facing.
But New York decarcerated at a very gradual pace, And that decarceration project followed a very significant uptick in the rate of incarceration and the length of terms of incarceration for serious violent criminals, so that we maximized those incapacitation benefits that we get when people are behind bars. In just the last couple years, Baltimore's decarcerated more than 10%. Wow. That's a short run downtick that is going to put really dangerous criminals on the street. And then on the policing front, we've just seen a significant backing off in both of those cities, although less so now in Chicago. I think the police have kind of reasserted themselves. But certainly in Baltimore, you've got about 70% fewer police-initiated stops. Again, this lowers the transaction cost of criminal activity in public spaces. In the aggregate, over time, criminals are going to internalize that.
You know, just in our last couple minutes here, how do you actually measure crime now?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's going to look like a vast drop-off, right? But it's because...
Right. I mean, well, this is one of the reasons why homicide has always been kind of the favorite metric of criminologists and criminal justice experts, because it's really hard to hide a body. Although Nicole Gelinas actually had a really interesting column in the New York Post yesterday about how you can kind of play with those numbers at the margins, but for the most part, the homicide numbers are always going to be a very good indicator about you know, what violent crime is looking like and how it's trending. So I do think keeping a close eye on that, but really the number that we want to get and keep an eye on are the number of violent crimes committed by people who could have otherwise been incarcerated. That's where the real story here is.
The released recidivist crime rate.
That's right.
Maybe we should come up with that as a stat.
I think we should.
You know, we'll do it together with the Manhattan Institute.
Sounds
the
good.
Released recidivist crime ratio.
I mean, certainly something.
You know,
Very,
it's
very
not horrible.
in our final minute, Rafael, it seems appropriate that we talk to you, given the fact that this is the first month that we've seen San Francisco's new district attorney, and he's one of these Larry Krasner non-prosecutorial style prosecutors. In cities like Philadelphia that have those style prosecutors, has that had any sort of direct effect on the crime rate in those?
etc. I do think that we're going to see a directly related uptick in crime that derives from that, but you know, without doing a real kind of regression analysis to isolate what those factors are, I would hesitate to say that it's having already a direct effect. But certainly, it stands to reason that if you lower the transaction costs of bad behavior by refusing to prosecute these things, you're going to get more of that bad behavior. It's just natural behavioral economics 101.
All right. Well, thank you, Rafael.
Thank you.
And as like with any business, basically, as you lower transaction costs, you bring more actors into the equation. And I got to talk to you more about the triple R, the released recidivist ratio.
There you go.
That might be something we could track.
There we go.
In real time. Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, California, coming soon to a theater near you. Bail reform. Make sure the judges keep their discretion in your area. We're going to take a quick break and come back with more Liquid Lunch right after this.